Grandma, did you seriously not iron my dress? And who asked you to clean my room? Now I can't find anything. Scarlett's sharp voice jolted Maisie awake, her fragile body flinching as she stirred in her rocking chair. She struggled to her feet and hurried toward the living room. You're nothing but trouble. Why on earth did you iron this blouse? It's supposed to look wrinkled. It's the style. This is a disaster. I'm late, and it's all your fault. Scarlett stormed through the apartment, throwing clothes left and right in her frustration. Maisie stood in the doorway, clutching her hands to her chest, her face etched with guilt. Scarlett, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to upset you. Scarlett paused for a moment, glaring at her grandmother with a venomous expression. Her beautiful face twisted with disdain, and she let the words drip from her lips like poison. Dad's right. You're useless now. All you do is cause problems. A nursing home, that's where you belong, with people like you who've completely lost it. Slamming the bathroom door, Scarlett disappeared, leaving Maisie pale and trembling, barely holding back tears. Half an hour later, her granddaughter rushed out the door to college, leaving the apartment finally enveloped in silence. It hadn't always been like this. Just 5 years ago, Maisie had her own apartment, but her daughter and son-in-law decided to start a business, and they needed money. It'll be wonderful, her daughter had promised, her voice sweet as honey. You'll have your own space, Mom. It's a duplex. Plenty of room for everyone. Believing her daughter's assurances, Maisie signed over her apartment and moved in with them. Gradually, all the household chores fell onto her shoulders, unnoticed and unappreciated. And now, this, a nursing home. Her chest tightened painfully as her heart stuttered and raced. She sank onto a stool and fumbled for the pills in her pocket. She really needed to see a doctor. The attacks were getting worse, and her medications barely helped anymore. But when? There was always so much to do. Lost in thought, she got dressed and headed to the store. Move it, Grandma. I've got a line of people waiting behind you. The cashier's impatient voice snapped her out of her reverie. A disheveled young woman with badly chipped nail polish drummed her long nails on the counter. For crying out loud, she sneered, rolling her eyes. You people are such a nuisance. Stay home with your senility and stop making life hard for everyone else. Maisie's cheeks flushed with shame as she hurriedly unloaded her basket onto the conveyor belt. By the time she left the store, she felt like someone had dumped a bucket of filth over her. Senile? She was only 60. Maisie was one of those women untouched by age. Slender, with silver-streaked hair neatly pinned in a bun and delicate wrinkles framing her strikingly clear blue eyes, she certainly didn't look like someone on the verge of losing her mind. Yet here she was, treated like a burden. Walking home along the tree-lined path, her head hung low, she barely noticed the world around her. What had her life become? Maisie, is that really you? Startled, Maisie turned to see a familiar face, and her breath caught in her throat. Casey? No, it can't be. Standing before her was a tall, fit man in a luxurious cashmere coat. My God, you're as beautiful as you were 43 years ago, he said, his eyes sparkling with joy. I can't believe it's really you. I'm so glad I ran into you. Casey had been her first love, all the way back in grade school. They'd held hands on the first day of class and had been inseparable until their final year. The love-struck boy had brought her armfuls of daisies and affectionately called her Maisie Daisy. She'd laughed, kissed him on the cheek, and called him Casey Daisy in return. They'd done their homework together, gone on camping trips, and even gotten sick at the same time. Everyone had been certain they'd marry someday. But then Casey's father had been transferred to a remote military base, and the family had moved across the country. Heartbroken, Maisie had cried for months, writing him endless letters. Casey had spent a fortune on long-distance calls, promising to visit. But gradually, the letters came less and less often, until one day, they stopped altogether. Maisie had gone on to study art history, married a brilliant architect, and had a daughter. Her marriage had been good. She had no regrets. But her husband had passed away at 50 from a heart attack, leaving her alone ever since. I've been walking behind you for a block, trying to convince myself it's really you, Casey said, stepping closer and enveloping her in a warm hug. I'm so glad. So very glad. The tea on the table had long since gone cold, but they couldn't stop talking. laughing and reminiscing. They shared memories of their childhood and old classmates that, as if the 43 years apart had melted away. A vase of enormous daisies stood on the table, and every so often, Maisie's fingers grazed their white petals tenderly. "This is how I live," Casey said with a smile. "I have my own business overseas. My son is settled in America and doesn't want to come back, but something drew me back home, to my roots. And what luck! It led me to you." He held her hand gently, his smile warm. "But enough about me. Tell me about yourself, Maisie." Maisie returned home late that evening and quickly set about preparing dinner, but her eyes kept drifting toward the enormous bouquet of daisies on the kitchen table. For the first time in years, she felt a lightness in her chest and a genuine smile on her face. Happiness. It was such a rare and unfamiliar feeling. She and Casey had made plans to visit his countryside home that weekend, a charming place he had inherited from an aunt. How fortunate they had found each other again after all these years. But Maisie's joy was fleeting. She now sat hunched over on a wooden bench under a linden tree, her frail frame barely upright. She no longer cried. Even the doctor had warned her, after another round of IV treatments, that she needed to stop stressing so much. But the ache in her chest wouldn't go away. The nursing home was situated in a picturesque area outside the city, surrounded by forest and a quiet river. No smog, no noise, just peace. But the tranquility only deepened her sorrow. 2 weeks ago, her son-in-law had silently driven her here without warning, leaving her stunned and abandoned. Her daughter, feigning exhaustion, had taken off for the Maldives with her teenage niece, Viola. Perhaps she had left to avoid the shame. The building was modest but well-maintained, and the small, kind staff cared for 30 elderly residents who had all been cast aside for one reason or another. Maisie couldn't believe her daughter could betray her so cruelly. It was impossible to describe the storm that raged within her. Her own child had discarded her like an old, useless trinket. She hadn't even been able to say goodbye to Casey. His city phone line had gone unanswered the morning she was taken away. And now the pain tightened her chest again, the relentless heaviness consuming her. Slowly, she rose from the bench and trudged back toward the building with small, weary steps. She bore little resemblance now to the radiant woman clutching daisies not so long ago. 3 months passed. Autumn that year was particularly dreary. The rain fell relentlessly, driven by icy northern winds, while the sun remained hidden behind thick, sulking clouds. The trees in the garden wept golden leaves, as if mourning the summer. Maisie stood by her window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Inside, it felt like winter had long since settled in her heart. Her daughter had all but erased her from memory, her only gesture of concern being a single call to the home's director during the first month. And Casey, he had vanished without a trace. Maybe he had left the country? But why hadn't he said goodbye? Questions churned in her mind, but she was too afraid to seek the answers. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. A young nurse peeked in with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Maisie, are you awake? Could you come downstairs? Someone's here to see you." Maisie descended the stairs, her heart fluttering with fragile hope. But in the lobby, she was met by a young man she didn't recognize. Disappointment weighed heavily on her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Are you looking for me?" "If you're Mrs. Maisie Harper, then yes," the man replied. "I've been searching for you for 2 months. Thankfully, your daughter's neighbors helped me find this place. I'm a notary, here on behalf of Mr. Casey Dalton." "Casey," Maisie whispered, her voice trembling. "Why didn't he come himself? And why would he send a notary?" The man's face softened with sympathy as he gestured to a chair. "Please, sit down, Mrs. Harper." Maisie sank into the chair, her heart sinking with an icy dread. The notary placed a folder of documents on the table and sighed. "Mr. Dalton passed away 2 months ago. He asked me to deliver these papers to you, along with a letter." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows as if trying to speak. Maisie sat by the window, staring at the unopened envelope in her trembling hands. Finally, she tore it open, and the tears she had been holding back poured freely. "My dearest Maisie, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer alive. I couldn't bring myself to tell you that I came home to die. The doctors caught it too late, stage 4 cancer. I didn't want to burden my son and his family with endless hospital stays, knowing there was no hope. They gave me 2 months, and all I wanted was to spend them with you. But fate had other plans. I'm so sorry for disappearing without a word. Things took a sudden turn, and I was hospitalized. I didn't want you to see me like that. Please, remember me as I was, healthy and happy. I've carried you in my heart all these years, Maisie. How I wish we had fought harder against the circumstances that kept us apart. I know about the situation with your daughter. I could hear it in the silences between your words. I don't want you to suffer or depend on anyone. Inside this folder, you'll find the deed to my house in the countryside. It's my gift to you, and I won't hear of you refusing. I think you'll find peace there. Just promise me one thing. Plant plenty of daisies. With love, always, your Casey Daisy. That night, the rain wept with Maisie in her empty room. A year later, a yellow taxi pulled up to a quiet cemetery. A slender woman stepped out, holding an enormous bouquet of daisies. The groundskeeper had grown accustomed to the sight of her with those flowers. She walked down the path, her steps slow and deliberate, the crisp leaves crunching underfoot. Reaching a gravestone beneath an old maple tree, she laid the bouquet gently on the ground. She brushed off the bench with her hand, sat down, and smiled sadly. Hello again, Casey Daisy. It's me. That's how the story ends, friends. Join the conversation below and share your thoughts on this story. If you found it captivating, share the link with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story that will make your heart race. Your support inspires us to create more tales. Take care and see you next time.